Upon joining the Galactic Federation, all member species were required to submit comprehensive cultural and historical databases. The intent was straightforward: to map behavioral norms, identify potential friction points, and ensure that interspecies cooperation proceeded with minimal misunderstanding. Humanity's submission passed initial validation. It was only upon review that concern emerged. The cultural database contained expected elements: governance structures, linguistic frameworks, records of conflict and cooperation. But these were not what drew attention. Instead, it was the density and persistence of what the indexing system labeled as ritualized behaviors. At first, the classification seemed overly broad. Many species maintained ceremonial practices tied to life cycle events or seasonal cycles, and humanity had those as well: birth observances, death rites, and recurring annual festivities. These were catalogued in vast detail, with regional variations and historical evolution carefully preserved. What unsettled the reviewers was not the presence of such rituals, but with their scale and frequency. Human records indicated that ritual behavior was not confined to rare or significant events. It permeated their very daily life. Morning consumption of stimulants was structured, repeated, and socially reinforced. Greeting exchanges followed patterned scripts, varying slightly between regions, but maintaining consistent intent. Shared meals were governed by both explicit and implicit rules: who speaks first, who serves, how food is divided, and when conversation pauses. Even departure from a social space required a sequence of acknowledgements that, while inefficient, were rarely omitted. One analyst noted, human individuals appear to engage in dozens of micro-rituals per standard cycle, many of which serve no direct survival function. Further review complicated this assessment. These behaviors, while superficially inefficient, correlated strongly with group cohesion. Environments in which rituals were observed consistently demonstrated lower rates of interpersonal conflict. Deviation from expected patterns produced measurable discomfort, even when the deviation had no material consequence. Investigators expanded their scope. They found rituals embedded within professional contexts, meetings beginning with standardized phrases regardless of necessity, celebratory acknowledgements followed predictable formats, and even failure was ritualized: formal apologies, reflective analysis, and in many cases, communal reassurance. More unexpectedly, humans created rituals in response to uncertainty. When faced with events beyond their control, natural disasters, long-distance travel, high-risk endeavors, they developed repeated actions, phrases, or symbolic gestures. These varied widely: verbal expressions wishing safety, physical tokens carried for perceived reassurance, synchronized behaviors performed before undertaking a task. Scientific officers flagged these as illogical. Cultural officers disagreed. A comparative analysis revealed that such rituals reduced anxiety indicators amongst participants, improving decision-making under stress. The actions themselves had no causal impact on outcomes, but their physiological effect was measurable and consistent. The most complex category was labeled shared fiction rituals. Humans collectively engaged in structured narratives, festivals, performances, and recurring traditions in which participants knowingly enacted imagined scenarios. These events were often tied to historical memory, but just as frequently were entirely constructed. Despite their artificial nature, they produced genuine emotional responses and reinforced group identity. One reviewer summarized, "Humans do not require objective reality as a prerequisite for meaningful ritual engagement." The cumulative effect of these findings presented a challenge to Federation models. Ritual in most species was a peripheral, a reinforcement of identity already established. In humanity, it appeared entirely foundational. They used ritual to create familiarity among strangers, to impose structure on unpredictability, and to transform abstract concepts of time, loss, and connection into shared, repeatable experiences. The final report to the Council reflected this shift in understanding. Humanity demonstrates an unparalleled capacity to generate and sustain ritualized behavior across all scales of interaction. These rituals, while often inefficient in isolation, collectively function as a stabilizing framework for a highly variable species. Recommendation: when engaging with humans, do not disregard ritual as extraneous. It is a primary mechanism through which they establish trust, cooperation, and continuity. A brief annotation followed, appended after formal conclusion. They will mark the smallest moments as if they matter, and through repetition, they make them matter.